So this is the Dividend Snowball. It's a simple idea. You invest in stocks that pay you a dividend, then as soon as you get that money, you reinvest it back into the same company and buy more of their shares. You rinse and repeat this over many years and you end up getting bigger and bigger dividend payments until eventually you can just start to live on that money without ever having to lift a finger. It sounds amazing, almost too good to be true, and there's more than one video on YouTube going over this topic with hundreds of thousands of views. But wait, after watching these videos, I need to warn you about some of the downsides that they've conveniently forgotten to tell you about and show you the truth about what the dividend snowball could actually turn out to be. Because if you're not careful, this dividend snowball could end up crumbling and you'll have no idea why. First up, we need to get realistic. A lot of the videos you see on YouTube that talk about passive income from investing and dividend investing always try to throw out numbers like $2,000 or $5,000 a month and then go on to show you how you could end up getting that as free money from your investing portfolio. It sounds great, and I know I'd love to get this kind of money every month as well without doing anything. The issue is they skip over one of the key parts of investing which also ties into the second issue. That is, this takes a very, very long time. So let's run a quick example. Say you want to make $2,000 a month. I'll just use dollars as more people can relate. If we wanted to earn that amount of dividends per month, we need $24,000 a year, which means that we'd need an investing account that was big enough to pay us that. Now let's take one of the best known dividend stocks of all time, Johnson & Johnson, a company that's increased dividends for more than 60 years, putting it right near the top of quality companies to invest in. How much would we need to have invested in total to be able to earn $2,000 a month or around $24,000 a year? Here's how we work it out. Johnson & Johnson pays out 4 dividends a year, and in total, their dividend yield is just under 3%. So this means that for every $100 you have invested, around $3 each year would get paid to you in a cash dividend. To work out how much we need, we know that 3% of the number would need to be $24,000 a year, and 3% divided into 100% goes in 33.3 times. So if you multiply 24,000 by 33.3, you get $799,200. So you'd need almost $800,000 in your portfolio to get $2,000 a month. And if you wanted more, then you need to sell your stocks, which is all up to you. Now, how do you get almost $800,000 in an investing portfolio? Well, if you invested into only Johnson & Johnson and reinvested every single dividend, you'd have to put in $500 every single month for the past 28 years to get to that today. So that's every single month from 1995 until now, not selling a single part of your stock and reinvesting every single penny. Also, bear in mind that $500 a month in 1995 was a big amount of money. In fact, it was almost 20% of the median average person's income across the whole of the US back then. You'd have to be doing very well to save 20% of your income and invest it every single month. It's definitely possible, but some of these videos made it sound really easy. Now, what about looking forward though? Here's where the second big issue comes in that doesn't get talked about at all, and that's inflation. Inflation changes everything, and you have to be really careful when you talk about some magic passive income. Look, $2,000 a month is a lot of money today, but in 10, 20, or even 30 years, it will become way less valuable. So if you want the same buying power of $2,000 a month today, in 30 years' time, you'd probably be looking at something more like $5,000. You can work that out yourself. If you just add 3% a year to $2,000 and do it for 30 years, you end up with exactly $4,854. Anyway, back to the point about the dividend snowball. The video I watched showed how you could end up with thousands every month after 30 years of investing, around $200 a month. But at no time during the video did they mention a single thing about inflation. And sure, it's a boring topic and you don't want to get too technical, and it's really important to inspire people to invest without getting too negative. But inflation is just a part of life. So for example, let's look at how inflation affects the stock market and more importantly, what it does to your money. If we stick with the S&P 500 and use this as our guide, going back over the last 100 years, $100 invested and left to invest that whole time would have become today $2.1 million. But once you remove the effects of inflation, you get to the real number that you need to pay attention to. Now, after inflation, that same investment is now $118,500. That's because $100 in 1923 is around the same value in today's money as $1,800. So here's where the issue is with some of the people pushing dividend investing as some kind of magic money tree. They forget to talk about inflation. Now, in one example I saw, they said that if you invest $200 a month in a stock that they hand-picked because it done really well in the past, and they assumed that it would continue the same for the next 30 years, you'd have just under $500,000. and you'd get dividends each year worth $47,500. So each month you'd be seeing just under $4,000 worth of dividends without lifting a finger. But $4,000 a month in 30 years' time won't get us anywhere near the same as it does today. Now, there's no way to know exactly what inflation will do as it changes each year, but even if we say that inflation averages maybe 2.5% a year, $4,000 a month today in 30 years becomes $8,300. So that means that you lose half of your buying power as you do more than double than what you have today. Suddenly this magical dividend snowball doesn't sound quite as good, does it? But this is just the tip of the iceberg, as there's still more that doesn't get spoken about very often. Next up, taxes, fees, and charges. Now, this one really depends on where you live and what kinds of investing accounts you use, because dividends are treated differently based on a number of factors. Here in the UK, for example, each person gets a dividend allowance of £1,000 a year before they have to worry about paying any further taxes. Unfortunately, it's set to drop even lower to £500 next tax year, which is just another reason you need to really think about whether dividends are the way to go. Still, we can avoid all taxes on dividends completely if we use a stocks and shares ISA, which is a tax-protected investing account. Now in the US, it's a similar story. You can get tax-free dividends if you use a Roth IRA, but outside of that, it depends on how much income you have and whether the dividend is qualified or not. Now generally, the more you earn, the more you'll pay in taxes on your dividends, but this is conveniently never spoken about. For example, let's say you did want $2,000 a month or $24,000 a year in dividends, and you earn $100,000 a year as your income in your job, you might end up having to pay between 15 and 22% in taxes. Sure, you might say you won't be working in retirement, but this would be taxed as you are working trying to build the snowball up in the first place. So you really need to focus on that if this is the way that you're going to go. Also, what about other fees and charges? Now, depending on what platform you use or what investing broker you have, you might be charged every time you reinvest cash because this counts as a new trade. Now, sure, lots of newer platforms can be very low cost or even free, but they still have to make money somewhere, and lots of small fees can really add up over time. It would be much better for most people whilst trying to build their wealth to not have to try and worry about constantly having to reinvest their money, especially as dividends create a taxable event whether you like it or not. And how about a key thing about dividends themselves that is often overlooked? They are not guaranteed in any way, shape, or form. A dividend is a discretionary payment paid out by a company. It's not like a salary and it's not fixed in any way. This means that it can be really risky to rely on dividends from single companies if you want this to eventually become your income to pay your bills. You might say that this is why if you were going to invest this way, you'd only pick the best companies that have paid dividends for decades and never skipped a beat. And sure, this all sounds sensible. You'd stick with the ones with a great track record that pay no matter what's going on in the economy, names like McDonald's, Johnson & Johnson, and maybe even Walmart. Are they going anywhere anytime soon? Probably not, but this completely misses the point and forgets to take into account total real returns. You see, if your goal is to just make as much money as possible in the stock market so you can eventually pay yourself money from it, then all you need to focus on is making that number as big as possible. Some companies don't pay a dividend at all, and typically you'll see that companies looking to grow quickly won't bother giving shareholders cash in dividends. They'd rather invest that money themselves. Now just think about companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, and many, many more. Could they eventually pay dividends? Maybe one day. But for now, why miss out on growth by just focusing on dividend-paying companies? Personally, I don't get the appeal. And while we're on that topic of performance, let me show you some long-term returns just to show you how difficult it is actually to try and pick the right stocks that end up doing really well. Now here's a chart that has the last 20 years of performance for a number of stocks, and all of these include having their dividends being reinvested. So we've got Johnson & Johnson, Coca-Cola, Walmart, and even an ETF that tracks all of the best dividend stocks called the Dividend Aristocrats. Really, it doesn't get much better than that. Now for reference, I've also added the S&P 500 here, and look where it sits in performance versus everyone else. And sure, if you look hard enough, you will find lots of dividend stocks that have beaten the S&P 500 over the last 20 years. We can always pick and choose and invest in hindsight, and you can also counter that with lots of companies that have beaten the market that don't pay a dividend. Interesting, isn't it though, that you're probably better off just investing into index funds, which already include all of these dividend paying stocks, than trying to find the right stocks to create this magical dividend snowball. And just before we move on, have a look at this. This little line here follows the stock performance of General Electric, one of the best known stocks and a company that's been running for more than 130 years. GE pays a dividend and had paid a dividend for more than 119 years before they cut theirs back in 2019. Going back to one of our earlier points, remember how I said that dividends aren't guaranteed? They do and can get cut or completely switched off. Would you have ever bet after 100 years of dividends that a company would end up stopping payments or reducing them down to almost nothing? Of course you wouldn't have, and that's just the reality of investing. Anything can happen and does happen all the time. Now, if you really want, I can bring up many examples of dividend cuts, which should remind you that the dividend snowball is never guaranteed. But let's say you still want to go after dividends because you really want to make this snowball happen, and you're fully aware of the risk and the downsides as well as the potential upsides too. What are your chances of picking the right dividend stocks that can beat the market, or the S&P 500 at least, over the past 20 years? Well, let me show you something that might change your mind. So as of right now, there's around 13,600 companies listed just in the US alone. Now, out of these companies, how many have delivered more than the S&P 500 has over the past 20 years, which for reference works out to be around 12.7% per year? The answer is just 805, or as a percentage, around 6% of all the companies in total. Now, what about a further question? Out of those companies who have beaten the market, how many pay a dividend and have a yield of 2% or more? Nothing too crazy or too small, a fair number, I reckon you'd agree. Well, from 805, we now drop down to just 156 companies. That's just over 1% of the entire US stock market that have beaten the market and pay a dividend. What companies will manage to do this for the next 20 years? I have no idea, but I can almost be certain that it'll be very hard to find them. So now we have to ask the question back to ourselves again. If you want to be an investor and eventually have this amazing dividend snowball, is it better to just stick using index funds, or are you going to bet that you can find the 1% of dividend companies that can beat the market? That's up to you, and before I get the people in the comments section who think I'm somehow against investing in dividend stocks, that's not the case at all. I really just want people to fully understand what they're doing and to really look into the pros and cons before they make an informed choice. Investing is such a personal thing. I'm not a professional financial advisor, and you have to find your own way to see what works for you. Dividends play a really important role in investing, whether or not you like it, and even if you owned a global index fund, you'd still get dividends, and we still need to get them reinvested somehow if we're going to be in this for the long term. I do get the appeal of dividends, and the idea of passive income is really appealing, that eventually you can have a monthly income of money that just comes in and you never have to lift a finger. But nothing comes for free, and all this takes a very, very long time and a lot of money up front to actually make it happen. Also, none of us know the future, and there's no way of knowing if a selection of dividend stocks ends up beating the S&P 500 over the next 10 or 20 years in total. The only thing that we can be certain of is that things are very uncertain and the future is very unknown. All we can do is control how much we invest, how we invest, and making sure that we use the right kinds of accounts to do it in the right way, which could end up saving us a fortune in the future on things like taxes, fees, and charges. Now, if you're still thinking about what you want to invest in and you want to try and pick the right stocks, just before you go all in on the next big thing, why not watch this video next, where I look into just how hard it is to really pick stocks and whether or not any of us should really even try bother. Until next time, happy investing.